success. He did win an Open Series event finally that allowed him to shave that beard, though it does look like it is growing back nicely here. But he is our Season 2 point champion. He'll be playing in our Players' Championship, and he's starting things off here with a favorite hoplite. Lowry will play a Temple of Ban, and he will scry with his Monsters deck as round number 1 is underway here from Richmond. Lots of things to talk about this weekend. Most of you already know about the organized play announcements from Star City Games for the Open Series next year. We've got plenty more to talk about as we make our way through 10 rounds of action here in Richmond.
Right, so looking at this blue-white heroic deck, this is kind of, I think, one of the more interesting decks as it really just came onto the scene a couple weeks ago. It'll be interesting to see how it does now that it's a little more of a known quantity. This kind of deck relies on a lot of cards, like God's Willing, Defiant Strike, combat tricks, which maybe can catch opponents off guard. I don't think Chris is going to do that to anyone today, but that said, this is usually a pretty favorable matchup, I would think, for this style of deck. Lowry's deck being a mid-range deck with no real sweeper, maybe it'll be pressed to stem off a tide of attackers, which is what Chris is going to do.
Yeah, this is part of the reason that Tom played this deck in Columbus a couple weeks ago, is because he felt your green mid-range matchups, your Monsters decks, your Abzan mid-range decks, they're a great matchup, as you're going to see an Ordeal of Heliod here suit up on the favorite hoplite, so that's going to grow a little bit larger and get in for 3 points of damage. Lowry's going to go down to 17. We'll see if there's a Mana Accelerant here, and he does in Rattleclaw Mystic, but these are the kind of decks that you're looking to prey on with Heroic.
Yeah, I mean, that turn 1 hoplite into Ordeal start, you know, that was something that was a feared combo of Limited. You see finally making its way to the constructed tables. It's especially potent on the play against red decks because it gets favored hoplite into 4 toughness range before the red-green deck ever has 2 untapped mana. So therefore plays around things like Lightning Strike, which is the main removal spell that you see out of red-green.
A Temple of Enlightenment here from VanMeter. He's looking to scry, figure out if he's going to keep it on top or the bottom. It will stay on top. That is definitely a selling point in this deck, is if you can get your creature out of Lightning Strike range, as you will gain 10 life here from the Ordeal, it's very difficult for this Monsters deck to get things off the table. And you think of Monsters, you think of them typically having the biggest creatures. That's not always the case in this matchup.
Right, and its favorite hoplite's pretty scary as a 4/5. There are creatures that red-green could have that would tangle with it, something like Pelucranos, but all it would take from VanMeter is a Defiant Strike, a God's Willing. These are cards that he has 4 of each in his deck to even push through something like Pelucranos. So it's questionable how's Lowry even going to kill the 4/5?
There's also a Battle-Wise Hoplite in play now here for VanMeter, so 2 heroic creatures. We'll see if he wants to try to maybe make the Battle-Wise Hoplite a little bit bigger, as he will take his time here on his 4th turn of the game. Lowry trying to stabilize with an Ash Cloud Phoenix. One card that's probably pretty important for Anthony in this matchup is Stormbreath Dragon. Protection from white seems huge here.
Yeah. Chris has a hand that's going to be pretty hard for Anthony to deal with. His remaining spells are both Feat of Resistance and God's Willing, which are his 2 instants in hand. They're joined by Heliod's Pilgrim, but he can use those spells to basically falter his creatures through to give them protection from whatever color Anthony's blocker is. And it's likely that that play will be available to Chris whenever he decides to take it, mainly because Anthony's going to have to keep tapping out. He can't just leave up mana for removal to blank those spells.
It's an attack. Both hoplites are coming in. One is favored, one is very battle-wise. And we'll see how Lowry would elect to block her. You have to imagine he's blocking because it's basically a free roll. The Phoenix isn't going to die. The question is what creature to block in this situation.
Yeah, well, he can't afford to just take all this damage. would bring him down to 7, which is too close to lethal, especially with cards like God's Willing and Feat. Imagine it'll try to trade with the Battle-Wise Hoplite. It would just be a chump block. But he's going to go with a chump on the favorite hoplite. Really, which is a lot of respect for a combat trick out of VanMeter.
Yeah, trying to preserve his life total here as well. You mentioned that he is at 13. You know, you let that 4 damage through. It could actually be more than that if Chris wants to use an instant speed trick. You never do. No, you've got an idea what's in the heroic deck, but it does change from time to time. So there is the chump block. 2 damage will come across. This is going to turn down Will the Phoenix into a morph creature. And there is a morph token there from Chris, ever the nice gentleman. There is a Plains here from VanMeter, and here is Heliod's Pilgrim. Tom Ross has dubbed this the Stoneforge Mystic of Standard. Do you agree?
Well, that's a pretty generous comparison. It is a 1/2 that goes and finds an equipment for you in a sense. It doesn't find Batterskulls, though. It finds Ordeals mainly, or maybe something like Aqueous Form. He has a lot of 1-ofs in here, which actually are pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's actually one of the neat parts about this deck that, you know, Tom Ross basically created out of thin air, and VanMeter is using it this weekend. He does have 4 copies of Ordeal of Thassa. That seems to be the best Ordeal that you can play. You mentioned Aqueous Form. We saw Ordeal of Heliod. There's also a copy of Stratus Walk and a Singing Bell Strike as well to tutor up. So VanMeter is going to go with Ordeal of Thassa to keep the ball rolling.
Yeah, so Stoneforge comparison may be a little generous, but it's still very powerful here. Anthony's on the back foot. I liked how Anthony played that turn. He's really just giving preference to his life total. He's not trying to trade with creatures. He's just trying to keep his life total as high as possible. Maybe then ramp up to a larger creature like a Stormbreath Dragon that just has pro-white. That said, it's still hard for him to not have, to avoid this pressure that Chris is putting on him.
There's another copy of Ashclaw Phoenix. Here's an Elvish Mystic as well. I think the most important card in the matchup for Lowry actually is Stormbreath Dragon. If he can find one, it will kind of blunt things. Though, as you did mention, these spells that VanMeter does have in his deck, your God's Willings and your Feet of Resistance, they actually kind of trump the Dragon.
Yeah, the spells trump the Dragon. And on top of that, VanMeter's creatures more or less just trump Lowry's already. If you look at the board here, Lowry, sure, he's playing 4 drops while Chris is playing 1 and 2 drops, but Chris's creatures are just as good right now.
Yeah, I'd say that favorite Hoplite, the first creature that came into play this game, is the best creature on the table. That's what makes this deck kind of a pain to play against. If they can actually get things going, you find a nice, healthy combination of heroic creatures and spells that enable that. Seems to be a pretty tough deck to beat. You can see that Chris is pretty far ahead of this game.
Yeah, so, yeah, this game's certainly looking good for Chris. And it's because this heroic deck matches up really well against, I think, red removal spells just in general.
Chris is going to sacrifice a Fledstrand.
Against a black deck, Chris would have to constantly be leaving up cards like Feet of Resistance and God's Willing, but because Anthony's on red, all he has to do is get a creature up to 4 or more toughness, and then he doesn't even have to leave up spells to protect it. He can just keep deploying threats, which is what Chris is doing.
Yeah, I think it's pretty nice that, if you're not playing against a black deck, you don't have to worry about a card like Hero's Downfall, for example, and leave up a God's Willing or a Feat of Resistance that can kind of make the house of cards crumble. It's red removal, it's Lightning Strike, it's Magma Jet, stuff that this heroic deck doesn't really mind playing against, as here's Ordeal of Thassa, a counter going to be added to the favorite Hoplite.
Yeah. And one of those tricks with Ordeals is that when your creature already has 3 counters on it, then immediately on the first attack, you get to crack the Ordeal. You see Chris doing that. His Hoplite all up to a 6/7, and thanks to that heroic trigger, won't take damage this turn.
Elvish Mystic is going to jump in front of the bus. See if there will be any more damage out here, any tricks here from Chris. It looks like he might be considering Feat of Resistance, maybe on Battle-Wise Hoplite, maybe looking to get a scry. We'll see. Maybe they'll get a little more damage through as well, make the Hoplite a little bit bigger. We'll see what VanMeter's thinking here, because he's certainly thinking about doing something.
Well, this is where the deck can be really tricky. You have all these spells which are great at protecting your creatures, and if you want to max value your cards, you would leave them all in your hand in case there's a removal spell. But there also is this dimension where you suddenly start turning your God's Willings into pseudo burn spells by targeting your own creatures with them for extra damage and scries. And there's a balancing act going on. When does he want to use them as burn spells, and when does he want to keep them back to protect his things?
Hero of Iroas will be the play after combat. And we're heading back Lowry's way. He's at 8. One thing to note here, too, is that, one of the ways that you can actually try to go about beating this deck is a racing situation. All right, I'll play some flyers. I'll try to get in the air, and I'll try to race you and chump block with Elvish Mystics and Rattleclaw Mystics and try to hold on. Well, the Ordeal of Heliod has really blown that entire strategy up. Here's a Goblin Rabblemaster. VanMeter's at 28.
Yeah, gaining 10 off the Ordeal seems very relevant in this matchup. I think, actually, as you mentioned, that racing strategy is probably the preferred strategy of the Monsters deck, especially Game 1 when they don't have any sweepers in their deck.
The Goblin token will be blocked by the hero. 4 damage is going to come across in the air. VanMeter's going to go down to 24 now. You can see Lowry's hand. He does have a copy of Crater's Claws along with a Wooded Foothills and a Forest. Looks like he's going to play, not the Foothills. I take it back. Somebody's interested in gaining a little life.
Yeah, it's a copy of Rugged Highlands. That's the common out of Khans of Tarkir. It's part of that cycle of lands that comes into play, tap 10, gain a life.
Yeah, we needed to know that one about a month ago for Grand Prix Orlando. I didn't expect it to show up here, but Lowry does have a copy of that in his deck this weekend. Look at that. Somebody wants to go to 9. Here's a land from VanMeter. It's another copy of Heliod Stoneforge Mystic. So we're going to go searching.
And I'm interested to see if he gets any of his one-ofs, and he is going to right now.
Aqueous' Form seems like another really, really tough card for this Monsters deck to beat, and for Lowry in this situation. Lowry's taking a look at his hand. You can see the Crater's Claws in the Forest, but I imagine we're going to see Aqueous' Form go on the largest creature here and push through some unblockable damage.
Well, interestingly enough, when you get Aqueous Form on a creature that's big enough, like this favorite Hoplite, the Red-Green Monsters deck actually does not have an answer to that outside of a really large Crater's Claws.
What's really nice about this too is, this is a situation where you have like kind of an inevitable situation where it's just like, I'm going to do this. I don't have to play a lot of copies of Aqueous Form because I have Heliod's Pilgrim, and I'm just going to force through a bunch of damage. It's definitely an enviable position to be in, as VanMeter's going to scry here from the trigger from the powerful enchantment.
So 7 damage is guaranteed. That would look to put Lowry down to 2, which means that Lowry's going to have to block the Hoplite and the Hero of Aerois.
He doesn't look like he wants to, but he definitely has to. VanMeter with a couple cards shuffling back and forth in his hand. I imagine he would have liked to use God's Willing to push these last points of damage, but there's a green creature and a red creature out there, so that's not going to work. He'll just have to use it as a defensive trick.
Yeah, not to mention actually a colorless creature, so he did have feet and God's Willing, so he could have gotten by red and green, but you can't actually choose colorless with those, so there was no way to get past the morph.
The morph is going to be blocking something here, as will the Rabble Master. Now we're trying to figure out, is there a way for me to make it out of this situation? As VanMeter's going to go to his grip. It's a feat of resistance. And that'll allow the last points of damage to come through. You mentioned 7 damage coming through. Feet will give you a counter. Heroic will give you a counter. That's 9, and that's the game for Chris VanMeter. Number 1 here on our leaderboard for season number 4, though he has already qualified for our Players' Championship. He's up a game here over Anthony Lowry. Blue-White Heroic up a game here over Monsters, as we will go to the sideboards in just a moment. But we want to talk first and foremost about the rest of season 4. We don't have a lot of it left. It's winding down pretty quickly. This year has gone by pretty fast.
Yeah, I mean, we like we said before, we have the 4th Invitational coming up in Seattle. Before that, we just have a few Open Series events, and we'll look through them here. We already started the month with Columbus Open Series and Grand Prix New Jersey. You see we're here in Richmond, the last one of the month. You'll be heading over down to Atlanta, being joined by Patrick Sullivan.
I'm hoping it's warm there. It's not cold here, but it's not warm either.
No, it's nice. This is great.
This is nice for you since you're from Minnesota. Do you have snow yet?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I thought so.
It's not actually, I mean, I have to give the due credit, though. It's not like Buffalo or anything you've been seeing those places up north. Minnesota, it's not the snow, it's more just really cold.
For those of you who are looking for Star City Games Open Series in Buffalo, that's probably not ever going to be a thing. We'll go to Portland. You and Patrick will be there. I'll actually be playing that weekend, so hopefully you guys will get to watch me play a match. We've got the Invitational in Seattle to wrap things up. Our Players' Championship in Roanoke.
Really looking forward to the Players' Championship in Roanoke. But as you saw there, yeah, just this Open Series, Atlanta and Portland. Then we have the Invitational, and then our Players' Championship. So the race is this is crunch time in the race for the Players' Championship.
This is the definition of crunch time. There are a lot of players here this weekend that, we might not see every time we do come to Richmond. I just saw Kent Ketter walking around. He's in search of Open Series points. Andrew Boswell, Sugarloaf, New York is not that close to here. He came down. He's in an off-camera feature match right now as well. So we've got some players in attendance here that you normally wouldn't see chasing those Open Series points. You see both players are sideboarding. We'll take a look at, we'll start with Lowry's actually. You've got that in front of you.
Yeah, so this matchup does get better for Lowry post-board. We did notice that pre-board, one's favorite Hoplite really got even to 4 or 5. It became very difficult for Anthony to deal with. So post-board, first of all, he has some sweepers. He has 3 copies of Anger of the Gods, which you'd expect him to use. What I really like in the sideboard for this matchup, however, is 3 copies of Hornet Nest, which he has in his board. A lot of times, Chris is going to be making 1 large creature, and I think Hornet Nest is... He can never afford to run a 4/5 into a Hornet Nest in this matchup.
That would be a bad idea.
Right.
Bad idea.
So I think it puts a lot of pressure on the card Aqueous Form, actually, with his Heliod's Pilgrims. So it's possible that if Anthony knows that, he also has some enchantment removal he could use. Any combination of Destructive Revelry, Back to Nature, and Reclamation Sage to knock off that 1 Aqueous Form.
Other side of things here for VanMeter, we'll find an Erase, 3 copies of Stubborn Denial, 2 copies of Glare of Heresy, a Treasure Cruise, 3 copies of Laguna Bend Trailblazer, and a Johnny's Presence, an Aqueous Form, so an additional one of those, a Seeker of the Way, an Ordeal of Heliod, and a Heliod's Pilgrim. What I love about this deck when we watched Tom play it 2 weeks ago, and what I love about it now is that this is not a 60-card deck, this is a 75-card deck. This is an extension of his main deck in the sideboard. You would expect to see 4 Heliod's Pilgrims in the main deck, but you don't. You see 3 in the main, 1 in the board, an additional Ordeal of Heliod to go along with the other one in the main deck, an additional copy of Aqueous' Form as well. So, what we've actually seen nowadays in deck building is a lot of people say, I've got 60 and I've got 15. This deck is a 75-card deck. Yeah,
this deck utilizes its sideboard more than you would expect a proactive deck like this actually to do. A lot of times when you have these extreme strategies, something like Heroic, the main 60 is really just the best 60, and the sideboard is, well, kind of just things that you might once in a blue moon need. But no, he actually, by extending the numbers in his main deck, he made his deck pretty customizable here, which I really like about it. Like he said, if the Heliod's Pilgrim Aqueous Form interaction is really what's important to this matchup, Chris can board in a second Aqueous Form, a 4th Heliod's Pilgrim. Similarly, if Ordeal of Heliod is better than Ordeal of Thassa in this matchup, we saw 10 life actually be pretty relevant.
I think it mattered that game, yeah.
Right, he can make that switch too. He has more Ordeal of Heliod in his sideboard.
I think that the additional copy of Aqueous' form is going to certainly come in here. I think we can see a world where maybe a Johnny's Presence does join the party, maybe the additional Heliod's Pilgrim to up the ability to find Aqueous' form or Ordeal of Thassa. He's got some options here. I think that Chris is in a favorable matchup. I don't think he needs to change a ton, but as you mentioned, Anthony does have a lot of options and a lot of pretty good cards to bring in here from sideboard.
Yeah, so the matchups is going to get tougher for Chris after board, but I think he expects that. It's likely that all of his matchups that very few of his matchups will get better after board, I guess.
We've got Brad Nelson in attendance this weekend, as we did mention. Todd Anderson as well. Brad right now at the bottom. He's the line.
Right, but he's in.
But
he's on the right side of the line.
If we ended today, he would be in. He would be playing at our Players' Championship, which is not too far from him in Roanoke, because that is where he does live. So it would be nice to just wake up for the Players' Championship, a short drive over to the home base and get ready to do battle.
Yeah, Todd Anderson, on the other hand, has some work to do. He's sitting on the other side of the line.
Yeah. So Brad has put together some nice weeks on the Open Series recently. Todd has been having, he's been kind of exiting the tournaments a little bit earlier than he would like. Don't know what he's playing this weekend. We've seen him do what Todd typically does, which is, play what is the best deck in the format and look to have success with it. But it hasn't really shown up. We've seen him play some obs on mid-range recently and some other things. So I'll be interested to see what he's playing this weekend and how the weekend does go for him. One of the many people will be following to see how things go.
Indeed.
Game 2 going to be underway here in just a moment from Richmond. If you are just joining us, it is Cedric Phillips and former Rookie of the Year Matthias Hunt at SCG Live, hashtag SCGRICH for your tweets all weekend long as we make it through 10 rounds of standard action today. Anthony Lowry is battling against Chris VanMeter. He is down a game right now with his Monsters deck, but VanMeter is going to be down a card as he's going to go down to 6.
Yeah, so looking at Lowry's deck, his deck really does have to transform after board. There are some cards in the main deck which really don't do a lot of work here. You see things like Chandra Pyromaster or Goblin Rabblemaster. These are normally very strong cards in this sort of deck, but as you saw last game when Lowry drew his Rabblemaster, it was dangerously mid-range, I guess, for the matchup. He had, his mana creatures were good, and I think his finishers were good, but Rabblemaster was really at a loss as to what it should be doing.
You're so polite.
It didn't block very well, and he didn't ever really want to be attacking with it either.
You were so nice this morning. It was terrible in that game. It was horrible.
Which is hard to say because Rabblemaster is a very good card.
Yes. It showed up at the wrong time. He's got to get off to a nice start this game. Something like an Elvish Mystic into a Rabblemaster. That's where it's at its best in this matchup. Yeah,
I think if he keeps all of them in, that's where it's at its best. He can also just become a pseudo ramp deck where he has a bunch of mana creatures and a bunch of dragons and then removal spells in between. And I think that we might see him do something like that.
Let's see how VanMeter 6 does look. One thing about this heroic deck, I think it mulligans once okay. I think if it has to mulligan twice, it is bad news for this style of deck.
Yeah, there are a lot of moving pieces. You do need your lands, your creatures, and your tricks to really make the deck work. If you're missing one of those elements, you're stuck with a bunch of cards like 1/2s for 1 that don't improve themselves. So you're right. I think it does need to have all the pieces together to make it work.
Well, the way VanMeter drew that top card, I think he's pretty happy. And you can actually see his hand now. He kept the hand with 2 islands along with some white cards, so he needed a white source of mana. He flicked it a little bit, but he's happy with what he found in a Temple of Enlightenment. So now he's got his white mana, as Lowry does have some mana acceleration here in Rattleclaw Mystic.
Yeah, and I think this is where Lowry wants to be. We said before, you might see him board into something of mana creatures and dragons and huge payoffs, and you see he has the option at a turn 3 Pelucranos right now on the play.
Now this is really interesting because you mentioned, okay, turn 3 Pelucranos, that's turn 3 5/5, that's pretty good. Or do you do that? Do you say, I'll lightning strike your creature, get your heroic creature off the board, just pass the turn back? I think it's actually a pretty tough decision if you're supposed to curve out there or just play the big creature.
Yeah, well, there's a chance with the blue-white heroic deck, they only play 19 creatures, which is a lot, but it's not the 20, it's not around 30 or 20 in the high 20s. If you just removal spell your opponent's early creatures, there's a chance that you leave them with a hand that doesn't have another creature, in which case the game becomes pretty much a walkover in Lowry's favor.
Well, he does have another creature. It's a copy of Hero of Iros. Now, one thing to note here is that VanMeter doesn't have white mana up for a God's Willing-esque card, though Stubborn Denial is a card that is in his sideboard. Don't know if it's in here after board, but we'll find out.
Right. You see Lowry with lots of removal options. Fated Conflagration, Sarkhan, a second Lightning Strike.
It's a second attack, too. VanMeter's going to go down to 16. So Lowry is playing the I will kill your I just want to keep your creatures off the table. As you mentioned, Blue Chronos, there's also an Ash Cloud Phoenix over there as well. So he definitely has some things that he could be playing and using all of his mana, but he's electing not to. Wants to keep these creatures off the table.
Well, once Chris has a creature on the board and gets to have mana up with that creature, the game becomes a lot tougher for Anthony. Suddenly, when he points his kill spells at one of Chris's creatures, then Chris starts protecting them. Chris's creatures grow bigger. A lot of things become difficult. The easiest time for Anthony to answer Chris's creatures is immediately when Chris plays them.
Now here is Blue Chronos. So there is a 5/5, and Lowry's just going to pass the turn back. He has to take a point of damage to cast it, do the Manic Influence, but not the worst place to be here for Lowry, as VanMeter's going to go a reaching. Now this is his turn. This is his opening to make something happen.
I was actually surprised to see Lowry make that play. Based on the line he'd been on before, he could have Crater's Clawed for 2 there, and then just attacked with Rattleclaw Mystic, which would have basically been running back the play he'd made last turn, which if he... I'm curious what changed. You know, he liked that play last turn, but he didn't like the play this turn. Maybe he values Crater's Claws more highly than he values Lightning Strike.
That is definitely interesting that he decided to change his play, change like his line that he'd been taking, because as you mentioned before, he was just said, okay, kill your creature, just attack for 2, be happy with that. Something must have changed here for him. Maybe it was a draw step, not entirely sure, because now he wants a 5/5 in play, maybe start racing this way, which again provides VanMeter with an opening to play Aqueous Form, to scry, and to make a bigger creature. There's a copy of Ordeal of Thassa now. That's going to trigger. This will allow him to scry again. That's a 4/4. We know a 5/5's coming in just a moment. At least we imagine, as there's the attack.
Yeah, so Chris is going to get his 2 cards here. Fortunately for Anthony, he does have the Fated Conflagration in his hand, so he will be able to get rid of this Hoplite. But a price was paid. He's going to take some damage here. Chris is going to get to draw 2 cards. This isn't a free roll for Lowry.
He has to scry, too. So this is an interesting turn, and maybe that's what shifted the plan for Anthony. Is he's saying, okay, I can get my 5/5 in because Fated Conflagration will take care of whatever. Like, what's the worst that he can do? Can he make something that has 6 toughness when I have this removal spell that can take care of whatever he plays? The answer is likely no, though, as we have seen before, this deck does have Feat of Resistance and God's Willing, so this could have backfired as well.
Well, maybe it was last turn he killed a Hero of Erois, and this turn it was Battlewise Hoplite. It might be that if he thinks Hero of Erois is a more scary threat, like, hey, I can deal with whatever Battlewise Hoplite becomes, I'm not sure I can deal with whatever Hero of Erois becomes. With Hero of Erois, you could play, after untapping with Hero, you could play Ordeal, swing, crack, your hero's a 6/6.
Yep.
Suddenly Fated Conflagration doesn't answer it.
This is true.
So, you know, it's hard to get Battlewise Hoplite up to a 6/6, but Hero could have done it.
Battlewise Hoplite is a 5/5. It's a prime target here. You saw VanMeter draw a couple of cards, scry a couple times this turn as well. There's a Plains in his hand. He hasn't played a land yet. He also has a copy of Temple of Enlightenment here as well. Very interesting to see exactly what land he elects to play, as he could play Plains to try to bluff a God's Willing, but he's going to go with a Temple, which means it's very cut and dry that the shields are down, and I would be surprised if we don't see Fated Conflagration from Lowry this turn.
5/5 unblockables, pretty big business here.
Yeah, and this is right on the upkeep.
Right. Fated Conflagration, if you cast it on your turn, you get to scry 2. It's not if you cast it at sorcery speed, which is kind of what it feels like. So even if you cast it during your own upkeep, you still get the scry 2. And I think Anthony cleverly using that to fix his draw.
That's a card I'm particularly fond of. Here's an attack for 5. VanMeter's going to go down to 11. I like Fated Conflagration a lot. You know, it's 5 damage, kills creatures, kills planeswalkers. 5 is kind of like the loyalty sweet spot for planeswalkers too. There's a cost. 3 red mana is pretty tough,
right?
But it's a pretty powerful card, actually.
In order to play cards like that, that's why you see Anthony playing things like Mana Confluence, Rugged Highlands in a 2-color deck.
Here's a favorite Hoplite. There is the Singing Bell Strike, one of my favorite parts of this deck. Sometimes you got to get a little dirty with the cards that you play.
You cast Singing Bell Strike on an opponent who has 5 lands in play. Like, oh, just don't play a 6th one.
The Bell Strike is in the house. Blue Chronos is shut down, at least for now.
Well, I mean, and shut down is still a pretty generous term here. I mean, Chris played a 1/2 into a Pelucranos with 5 mana up. I mean, that's shut down. I don't know if you can actually say that.
It doesn't feel like it.
Anthony sure could tap his lands and just try to kill the Hoplite right now.
He'd have to pay a little bit of damage to do so. He does have 2 copies of Manic Influence in play, but I'm right there with you. That favorite Hoplite might not be long for this world, though Lowry does have a lot of nice options in his hand. So we'll see what he elects to take. Again, he could use Plukernos and activate the Monstrosity. I believe he has a Lightning Strike in his hand. We know about the Crater's Claws. So he's got a lot of red cards over there that he could play this turn.
He has Sarkhan too. That would not be playing around Stubborn Denial, which is dangerous, but I think might work out.
Well, just a simple attack for 2 to start things off here. VanMeter's going to go down to 9. At least we think. Maybe he's considering trading here.
Oh, with 2 cards in his hand, that's a risky trade for VanMeter.
And he's going to take it. So he's going to go down to 9, and now there is a copy of Ash Cloud Phoenix. Phoenix is actually interesting in this situation because you have the safety net of just saying, okay, you make a big creature, I'll just block.
Right.
And that's not a terrible spot to be in. You know, as long as you allow me to block, there's no God's Willing or Feat of Resistance showing up to the party.
I actually think these mana confluences are being difficult on Lowry. If he had mana that didn't deal damage to him, I would have thought he would have passed the turn there and just made no attacks. Then you can take 1, try to attempt to kill Chris's guy on end step. In the situation that doesn't work, you can Lightning Strike as well. There's, you can play with a lot of good options here.
And a turn Feat of Resistance there from VanMeter. He knew what his draw step was going to be. It's a copy of Ordeal of Thassa. So that's why you see what looks to be a very strange play. A Heliod's Pilgrim's going to come down. VanMeter's going to go with Searching. The question is, what is he going to go searching for? The answer is Ordeal of Heliod. Somebody is in the market for 10 life.
And I think this to me felt like a slight misstep on Anthony's side by not leaving mana up here.
Okay.
He has a hand that's flush on removal, and Chris just had 1 creature. And by taking down his shields for a turn, Chris is really making the most of it here.
You see him very quickly. He's going to play the Ordeal of Heliod. He's going to gain 10 life. 2 counters on the favorite Hoplite. All of a sudden, we've got ourselves a very large creature in play.
Yeah, so it's a 4/5. More importantly right now, Chris is at 19, so Anthony is just decidedly on the wrong side of the race here. And now he has to debate whether or not he wants to chump with this Ash Cloud Phoenix.
I think that is heavily under consideration right now. 4 counters on that thing, plus the base 1/2 power and toughness is going to make that thing a 5/6 that is coming into the red zone right now. That thing is huge. That thing is out of Fated Conflagration range. And now you're actually into, okay, what happens if an Aqueous Form shows up to the game all of a sudden?
And I think wisely Anthony blocks it.
Me too.
He does have the Crater's Claws in hand, which can kill the favorite Hoplite because of the Ferocity trigger.
I think that you have to take advantage of that now if you can.
Chris is tapped out.
Yeah.
This large creature is a problem. I think you need to deal. Yeah, I think you'll see him deal with the problem, reset, and start again. Now there's some danger because he's taking damage to do this again.
You mentioned it, he does have enough mana to do this. And there is the scary part of taking damage to it, but you have to get that thing off the table. It's caused so much trouble the last game. It's beginning to cause trouble this game. He'll have to take 2 to do it and go down to 9, but you have to get that thing off the table.
Right, and that is X equals 4 because he has the Plukernos in play. It is Ferocious, which adds 2, so it's 6, just enough to kill the favorite Hoplite.
And we're going to see an attack here from the Morth creature, and I think I'm actually okay with this. It might feel a little bit risky, but you've killed so many heroic creatures this game. You know that Chris only has 1 card left in his hand. You don't know what it is. We know it's an Ordeal of Thassa. So you're probably sitting okay. You know, what's the worst thing that can happen? Which I guess are famous last words.
Yeah, well, I guess nothing bad can happen. I'm not positive I see the appeal of 2 life points. I think Anthony's playing a control game that once he deals with Chris's board, he can more or less win at will.
The draw for the turn was a copy of Aqueous Form. The second one in the sideboard. And there's an Ordeal of Thassa there as well. But this is one of the few times that when you cast Ordeal of Thassa, something doesn't get a counter right away. It's just kind of boring. But the attack will give it a counter. So in for 2, we're going to go. Lowry is going to go down to 7 here. And VanMeter's just going to pass the turn back. Going to sandbag that Aqueous Form. So we head back Lowry's way.
Can't strongly enough state just how much those mana confluences have been an issue for Lowry, which is why I think he's really happy actually to draw a card like Rugged Highlands.
Yeah.
He gains a life, and now he can stop tapping those confluences.
They played it with a little flair, but oddly enough, going up to 8 might be the difference in this game. You mentioned it, those mana confluences have been very problematic. They've been dealing a lot of damage, as there's a Lightning Strike to take care of this, so a little 2-for-1 action. And now you have to imagine Anthony is in the driver's seat. He's going to attack here for 4 points of damage.
Yeah, the blue-white heroic deck is very good out of the gates. And I think like a lot of Tom Ross creations, it's like once your opponent kills your last creature, there's no coming back. Yeah. I've seen decks like Boss Sly or Legacy Infect. I think those decks also have that thing. Like, once I kill your last creature, oh boy, then you start drawing a bunch of pump spells, and
The draw steps get pretty ugly.
oh, they get
pretty fast.
really bad. And I think there's going to be some of that going on here. You know, you see Chris with a hand of land, Aqueous Form.
This should be a doozy.
Another land.
Yeah. Sarkin came down, it attacked, and VanMeter's going to pack it up. So Anthony Lowry is going to win game number 2 here. Monsters, Heroic, a little Pharaoh's battle here, going to game number 3 in just a second.
And interestingly enough, Anthony won that game without the help of any of his board cards, which I think is pretty interesting. He did have an extra Lightning Strike and maybe an extra Fated Conflagration in his board, but the cards that I was really expecting him to take it down with, things like Anger of the Gods, Hornet Nest, we never really saw any of those that game.
Yeah, I mean, I actually want to see what Hornet's Nest does to a game, mostly because I love the card Hornet's Nest, but I do want to see what it's going to do if he's able to draw this. He's going back to the drawing board here, so Chris is actually already shuffling up for game number 3. Anthony's going to change some things around. While these two players do get ready, we will talk about Cardboard Crack, the very funny and popular Magic comic.
I'm a pretty big fan of this series. It started kind of just as some images that I would get linked to online, but it has since really kind of come into its own. You now can find it on starcitygames.com/cardboardcrack. There are 3 volumes of the comics. Each one is $12.99, and they're available for order.
Yeah, it's pretty sweet. You know, I follow him on Twitter. It's in the Star City Games newsletter as well. Pretty funny stuff. Again, I'm a little disappointed there's no great way to make Reed Duke's hair show up, but this is all part of doing stick figures, I suppose.
I know.
It's a real rough life. But Cardboard Crack on starcitygames.com, $12.99. For each book, 3 of them available. As we do turn our attention back to Lowry and VanMeter, I still think it's a great matchup for Chris. I do think it might be a little more difficult on the draw than it is on the play, as we saw in the last game. Also, we did mulligan the last game, but by and large, I think this is a matchup where if I told you, hey, you're going to play against green-red monsters all day, he'd be pretty happy.
Yeah, well, we saw on the play, he was able to get one of those favorite hoplites to just dodge Lightning Strike. It was a 3/4 by the time Anthony untapped, and that's so huge because it's so difficult for Anthony to answer the card at that point. I think Hornet's Nest is still his best way to do it at that point, but he needs to have one. He only does have 3 in his board.
I'm a little surprised to not see Lowry playing Teamer Monsters this weekend. That's a deck that he's been working on quite a bit, but you know, he has been writing a lot about the differences between playing the Teamer version, of course, with blue versus just the 2-color version here in red-green. You know, what's the best way to go? It's pretty tough to say. I mean, we saw this red-green Monsters deck, or at least a take on it, win Grand Prix Los Angeles, so clearly it has a pedigree of success. What's the best way to go? That's pretty tough to say.
Yeah, there are different strengths of the different builds. He doesn't get access to things like Stubborn Denial or Savage Knuckleblade this time around. But I think in this matchup, I'm not sure what the appeal of the blue cards would really be. So red-green seems just as well situated, even if it's a tough matchup both ways.
Yeah, and I'm with you, where I think it's a tough matchup both ways. You know, if you're choosing to play a Monsters deck, you're hoping to dodge heroic decks for the weekend, which clearly he has not been able to do thus far. The blue does provide you with some things, and we know that a player like Brian Kibler is a big fan of the blue cards in his deck. He loves the Savage Knuckleblade. Stubborn Denial has been pretty powerful for him as well. So, you know, this weekend, Anthony has elected to take the 2-color approach, and we'll see if he can have similar success as we saw at Grand Prix Los Angeles, which would be winning the tournament, which would be pretty good.
Absolutely.
I do like this heroic deck, though. I think this is going to pick up in popularity. Tom's performance was impressive a couple weeks ago in Columbus, but as we have come to find out here over 2014, Tom's performance is always impressive.
I mean, all the way to last weekend's Grand Prix, we had a runner-up finish of a 4,000-man event. This certainly has been Tom Ross's year. A lot of times, you don't always see other players replicate Tom Ross's level of success with his decks. I think Infect has really caught on in Legacy where other people have had successes with it, but something like Boss Sly was, I feel like Tom was really just the premier pilot of that one. So I think it's interesting to see other people play Tom Ross decks to see, okay, how well is this deck going to do in other people's hands?
I think we'll find out some of that tomorrow. So you mentioned Infect. I think with his runner-up finish at Grand Prix New Jersey last weekend, we're going to see more of that than we normally would. You know, the deck is definitely legit. It's very hard to play, as Tom has demonstrated, but I think we'll see more of it and more people giving it a chance now. And, you know, we've seen him have open series success with it, but in a 4,000-person Grand Prix, that kind of solidifies it. Okay, this is a thing that we should probably be doing. So it's quite good.
Sure.
It's Plains. It's a favorite hoplite. We're underway here in game number 3, as Lowry will draw a copy of A Wooded Foothills.
And this was not the creature that Anthony wanted to see. It's going to give him memories of game 1. Chris has enough ordeals and enchantments in his deck that you have to think that this guy's going to get 4 toughness.
Would have foothills and just passing here for Lowry. So we'll see if a VanMeter can grow this thing very quickly as he did in the last game. This might be the most important card in the matchup for Chris.
On the play, it certainly seems like it, just because of how fast he can grow it. That said, doesn't look like he has that ordeal right away. So maybe Anthony has a chance.
Flooded Strand, it's a Defiant Strike. That's going to trigger. Chris doesn't look thrilled that this is his turn. As you mentioned, no ordeal of Thos, no ordeal of Heliod. Nothing insane going on this turn, though he does get to draw a card and deal some more damage this turn. So he's coming in for 3.
Yeah. And he does have his draw. There was a copy of Lagana Band Trailblazer, but you see him leaving up a mana for a possible God's Willing or Defiant Strike or something else.
Radical Mystic again here for Lowry. So mana acceleration has not been a problem here for Anthony in any of the games. He's always had a way to accelerate. We'll see if he can take advantage of it this game. Was able to do it in game 2. Wasn't able to do it in game number 1. But this is the most important one.
Chris's deck, once again, capitalizing on the fact that a lot of these decks, even the 2-color decks, their mana hurts themselves. Anthony, with that double fetch, goes down to 15, and you see a mana confluence hiding out in his hand. Makes me start to think, just how many more points of damage is Anthony going to have to deal himself?
The mana confluence is just it's like a necessary evil in this deck because the 2-color decks don't have great mana. It's okay, but it's not great. You know, you don't have Tri-Lands. I guess you could if you wanted to. You could play a card like Frontier Bivouac, but, you know, it comes into play tap versus coming to play untap, so there are some costs that are paid in different ways.
And that's pretty wild to say. You know, all the 2-color decks just have bad mana.
It's strange.
When you have so many duels, right? You have temples, you have these come into play tap lands if you need them. You have fetch lands.
You have a lot of options.
I mean, Anthony gets to start with 4 Wooded Foothill, 4 Temple Abandoned, 2 Rugged Highlands, and then you just have to say, yeah, but the deck still has bad mana.
Yeah, bad mana. I need 4 copies of Mana Confluence or whatever, which is really weird.
It's only 3. He didn't run the 4th.
Fair. Might be regretting it. We'll see.
Yeah. I mean, they've been painful every time we've seen one in play.
It's a Temple of Enlightenment. Top card's going to stay on top here for VanMeter. He's going reaching. Aha, we're trailblazing now.
Yeah. Sneaking a peek at Chris's hand, there is that copy of God's Willing hiding out in there.
But this is the least explosive hand we've seen from Chris so far, like by a wide margin.
Well, his creatures, because he's leaving up cards like God's Willing, the issue is that when he doesn't have auras, yeah, he's got some creatures, and maybe Anthony can't kill them, but his creatures don't actually deal damage very well. He's got a 2/3 and a 0/4. And at some point, Anthony's going to start playing things like 5/5s for 4, and it's not going to matter that Anthony can't kill Chris's creatures, because his creatures aren't worth answering yet.
This is easily the most honest draw that VanMeter has had so far. I'm going to see if Lowry is able to take advantage of that. You see he's staring at a Faded Conflagration right now. There's also an Ash Cloud Phoenix over there. He's got some options. Do I want to play a removal spell into open mana against this deck? Probably not, so he's not going to. He's going to take 1 for Mana Confluence again and play an Ash Cloud Phoenix.
You see Stormbreath Dragon hiding in his hand, and there's actually another card in here that I was not expecting to see in his hand. This is like 1 copy of Harness by Force that he's brought in for the matchup. Presumably if one of Chris's creatures gets really large, Anthony can take it and hit him with it. That, to me, though, says that Anthony really thinks that his plan is not to become a control deck. His plan is to race.
Yeah. And racing, I feel like, can be the right strategy, depending on how the draws do line up. The thing that makes this kind of an interesting the racing situation is that Chris has the ability to just blow that up with Ordeal of Heliod, gaining 10 life. He can just completely annihilate the idea of, we're racing? All right, well, I'm going to gain 10. This race is over.
Also, Harness by Force is a 3-mana sorcery, and you are playing against a deck that runs cards like God's Willing.
Maybe you're going to play Temple of Enlightenment. He'll scry, and now here's an Aqueous form. So chances are he'll be scrying again in just a moment. Heroic Trigger, of course, will make that into a 3/4, and now it is time to scry and unblockable damage. So Ash Cloud's Phoenix, its plan of maybe blocking, not so much.
Aqueous Form was the card Chris needed. It said that there was this problem where Chris's creatures weren't relevant. Well, now that guy is relevant, and with the double God's Willing that's in Chris's hand, I'm not sure Anthony's going to be able to kill this.
Well, Lowry does have a copy of Back to Nature in his hand. Interesting.
That'll be a good start. He has that and a Reclamation Sage.
Yeah?
So he can blow up the Ordeal.
You mentioned the last game he didn't, I don't think he drew any of his sideboard cards. Well, he's drawn quite a few of them here.
Yeah.
There is Reclamation Sage. That's super important for him.
Yeah, I don't think he was going to beat that Aqueous Farm.
I don't think so either. Looks like he's got to get into the red zone now, too.
And here's that racing strategy we've seen Anthony been doing. His 4 comes across in the air.
And I think that I don't think that you can play like a slower game. I think that you have to race. Your creatures are big. You know, you have Stormbreath Dragon in your hand. That card has haste as well. You've got some nice options here. It looks like VanMeter is going to cast the God's Willing on the upkeep and trigger Heroic. That's going to tick up to a 3. So now we have a 4-power creature here.
Well, here's the danger. With those 2 God's Willings, Chris can tick it up to from 4, and then next turn he can make it lethal. He can make it a 5.
It is 100% on Lowry to leave back different colors of creatures back. There's an ordeal.
And this was one of the problems we had with the racing plan. It shows up here.
Now, Lowry does have Back to Nature, so he's going to cast that. He'll have to take 1 to do it. So it's not going to gain 10 life, and it's not going to provide a counter with the ordeal. So this is actually probably pretty important if we're going back to the racing, which it looks like we are.
I don't think there's anything to be done on Chris's side. His remaining 2 cards are God's Willing and Hero of Erois.
Okay, Chris is looking at the grip, but I'm with you. I don't think he has any options here at this point. So there goes the Back to Nature. 10 life will not be gained. This is an attack. It'll be for 5. Lowry's going to go down to a very low 3.
Yeah, he had protection from green off that upkeep, God's Willing.
And I think it's very important for Anthony. He has to decide, okay, do I want to leave 2 colored creatures back? Do I leave back Ash Cloud Phoenix? Or do I try to keep attacking with it? I think that's the big question at this point. And that Mana Confluence, we've talked about it quite a few times. It's causing a lot of trouble.
Well, if Anthony, you see him shuffling this Fated Conflagration to the front of his hand, it doesn't do enough damage right now. It only does 5. That favorite Hoplight's already a 5/6.
Yep.
You might see Anthony try to block and Fated Conflagrate the creature. It would get blown up by God's Willing, which Chris does have. But this is what we saw in game 1. When Chris's creatures get large enough, Anthony's deck has trouble killing them outside of Hornet Nest.
And that might be one of the best draws he could find here.
It would shut down, I mean, it wouldn't beat the God's Willing in Chris's hand, but it would shut down the rest of his deck.
He's attacking for 4. What's the follow-up going to be? He's going to play Stormbreath Dragon. Okay. So he's going to take 1 to do this. And he's got 2 different colored creatures back on defense, so that's good for him.
Now, because he's gone to 2 here, there is another... This Lagana Band Trailblazer starts becoming relevant.
Dial up that 0-4.
It doesn't have to get very big.
It's getting ready, though. It's thinking about it.
He's just 1 feat of resistance. 1 Defiant Strike is lethal. Just think about, you know...
I mean, it's been sitting there the whole game doing nothing.
Yeah, hasn't been the best.
But it's all maybe part of the plan here for VanMeter, as he will survey the board, will Chris.
And remember that VanMeter, this game is, like, he's at 11, and right now Lowry has 8 power in the air. So Lowry can swing the Phoenix next turn, leave back everything, and then on the following turn, swing lethal.
And we can't forget, too, he has a card like Lightning Strike in his deck.
Yeah.
So if he just draws one of those.
It might be, you might have Chris just next turn.
Yeah. All it takes is 1 draw set. That's why the Back to Nature on the Ordeal was such a good play and such good timing. Because if VanMeter's at 21, the narrative on this game is completely different. Oh, Laguna Band is feeling a little frisky. I like it.
This is a very bold swing. I mean, the obvious block from Anthony is going to be Sage on to the Trailblazer and Dragon onto the Hoplite.
Yeah, I think that's the clear-cut block, as you mentioned.
So Chris has something in store for this. And this is what I'm not sure about this play on Chris's side.
I'm trying to figure out what does this accomplish. Okay, so God's Willing is going to target this. I mean, it gets
kills
Reclamation Sage out of the way.
Sage.
And he's going to scry here. There's the hero. Just passing the turn. Maybe he just wants to get a creature out of the way. But Anthony is untapping. Wow, he's untapping very quickly. 4, 8, 9, 10. So he's a little short right now. Oh, there's the Harness by Force.
That doesn't kill it, though.
Doesn't kill it, but he has no blocker.
2, 4. Oh, and then he's at 11, so
Correct,
that is
yeah.
enough. Okay,
4 and
so
8,
that'll do it.
8 damage from the Dragons, 2 from the Hero, and then 2 from the Rattleclaw Mystic will make it more than 11, and that is lethal here. And I feel we just watched a bit of an upset as Anthony Lowry is able to get the job done with Monsters over Chris VanMeter playing Heroic 2 games to 1. It's a difficult matchup for Monsters, but Anthony was able to pilot his way through it.
And that was a matchup where I did not expect Harness by Force to be very good, but Anthony winning the game off the card, showing us what is up with the matchup.
I'm much like you expected that card too. I mean, there's the potential, right, for him to catch someone off guard with it because that's not really a card that's on people's radar at this point in the format. And I don't think it's on people's radar in this particular matchup, but it clearly worked out okay. A little surprising to see that result here of Lowry over VanMeter. This is the kind of deck, again, that I feel VanMeter wants to play against every single round with the Heroic deck. But